Good morning, everybody. Good Erev Yontif. Tonight is Shvi Shal Pesach. Today we are learning the fourth Perek of Kesuvos. Today's shiur is Lila Nishmas. Aaron Nachum Sucha Kohen, Yeshua Morcha B'Shepsel, Baruch Hashem Shmolei, V'Biyam Moshe Ben Yosef. May the Nishmas have an Aliyah. And for Shlomo for Yisrael Ben Machalei, Rachel Bas Pesach Zelda, Avram Yitzchak Ben Risha, Chaim Esther Ben Bela. For Shlomo B'Sof Shar Chal Yisrael, and as a special host to our good friends at the Imperial Advisory Group. If you need help with your CFO stuff for your business, reach out to them at imperialgrp.com. Of course, FD not today. Um, Today's paragraph is a long one. We'll try to do this as efficiently as possible. Perek Dalid, Mishnah Aleph, and of course, we will take a break for the next 2 days over Yontif and resume with Perek Hay on the Erev Shabbos. Narash in the Perek Dalid, Mishnah Aleph, Narash in this process. If a Nara, who's a Basula, was seduced, Bashta Upegama Vikansa Shal Avia. The payments for her shame, her reduction of value, and her fine go to her father, Vahatsar Bitufasa. And the same is true regarding the payment for pain in the case of one who is violated, that the payments go to the father. Um, so if she had her case tried in court before the father had died, meaning that he was still alive when the court ordered the criminal to pay. So let's go back over here. If the right, so if her father was still alive when the court ordered the criminal, meaning the seducer or the violator, to pay, hooray, hey, and shall out, the payments of the property of the father. Mesa, hooray, hey, and shall. Therefore, even if the father dies before he collects the payments, they go to her brothers, who are his heirs. Lo, he speak of Hama B'din Shemisav. However, she did not have a chance to have a case tried in court before the father died. He died, meaning they died before the court ordered the payments to be made. Hooray, hey, Shal Asma, they go to her. Since the father was not alive when the case was decided, and therefore his heirs did not get any right to the payments. Instead, they are paid directly to the Nara. If she had her case tried in court before she became a Bulgaris, meaning that the court had ordered the criminal to pay when she was still a Nara, who's under the father's jurisdiction, Shalav, then the money becomes the property of the father, and he gets paid. Therefore, even if the father dies before collecting the payments, they go to her brothers, who are his heirs. However, if she did not have a chance to have her case tried in court before she became a Bulgaris, meaning that she was already a Bulgaris when the court ordered the payments to be made, Asma, they go to her. Since she had left her father's jurisdiction by the time the case was decided, he has no right to the payments. Rather, they must be paid to her. Rabbi Shimon says, if she did not have a chance to collect the payments on her father's behalf before the father died, they go to her, and not to her father's heirs. Rabbi Shimon holds that the crucial time is not when the court orders the payments, but when the payments are collected. Therefore, if the father was alive at the time of the court's decision, but died before receiving the payments, it never became his property, which should go to the heirs. When he dies, therefore the right to collect the payments goes not to the heirs, but to the Nara herself. Her work and what she finds belong to her father even before she collects them on his behalf. Therefore, if the father dies before they are collected, they go to her brothers, who are his heirs. Um, Yeah. Mr. Bass, Hamare says Bita Garsha. So if one's daughter was betrothed, was engaged, and she was divorced before Nisuin, um, Erisa Venus Armula, and then she was betrothed a second time, and she was widowed before Nisuin. All this was taking place while she was still Katana or a Nara. So, so twice before the age of 12 and a half, she was engaged and divorced, or engaged and then engaged and then widowed, all before she was 12 and a half. Subha says Shalom. Her ksuba from each of the two marriages belongs to her father. He see of a gersha. However, if she was fully married and divorced, he see of in this armula, and then she was fully married a second time and widowed, when she was still a Nara, a Katana, or Nara. So by the time she was 12 and a half, she was ready. By the time she was 12 and a half, she was already married and divorced, married and widowed. Subasa Shala, her ksuba from each of the two marriages is hers. Because once a girl performs nisuin, she leaves the jurisdiction of her father, and he's no longer entitled to any of her income. Rabbi Yehuda says, the first ksuba belongs to the father, although it's not collectible until after the nisuin. It was written before the nisuin, and it is the time of the writing, the time of the writing of the ksuba that counts the most. I'm allowed to come respond to Yehuda, Mishi Sia Ein Via Shuspa. Once she became fully married, her father has no jurisdiction over her. Right to the Chachamim is not to the time when the ksuba was written that counts, the time when it becomes collectible. Therefore, since the first ksuba was not collectible until after Nisuin, at which time she had left her father's jurisdiction, he is not entitled to it. It's a long paragraph, needs some water. Mishnah Gimel. Um, Mishnah Gimel goes on the halach of the Torah of Motzi Shema, someone who's a slanderer, meaning that a husband betrothed a Nara and claimed that she was not a basula on the night of the wedding, and he brought witnesses who testified that she committed adultery, niyuf, during the betrothal period, during Erisin. So if the Edom were lying, then the husband receives lashes for slandering his wife, and he must pay a fine of 100 sellers. One cell is 4 zuz. So 100 sellers is 400 zuz. However, if the witnesses were telling the truth, she received the death penalty of skila for the crime of niyuf, and the skila takes place at the entrance of her father's house. That's pretty severe. Um, so the Torah's section on Mutushemas refers specifically to a basula, to Nara basula, who was accused of having committed niyuf during Erusin. It also specifies one who was born as a Jew. Um, so now this mission is going to teach the halachas that apply to a girl who was born as a non-Jew and was Megai. So Mishnah Gimel. Hagiyarish and this guy Rabita Ima, if a female converted together with her daughter, Vizinsa, and the daughter, when she was a Nara Basula, committed Niyuf during Erisin, Harezu Bechenek. She's put to death by strangulation and not stoning. Ein la, ein la lo Pesach Besav. She is not executed at the entrance of her father's house. And if the witnesses who testified against her are found to be false, and the husband does not pay the fine of 100 sellers, with the law of Mises Skila at the entrance of her father's house, and the husband's fine of 100 sellers pertain only to a Mara Basula was born as a Jewess and not to one who was born as a non-Jew. Haisa Horasha Shlo Kedusha Velidosa Kedusha. If her conception was not in Kedusha, meaning that she wasn't Jewish, but her birth was in Kedusha, being that she was Jewish after she converted. She was she was born after her mother converted. Hare Zubiskila, and she is put to death by stoning, as in the case of an ordinary Jewish woman. However, the other laws in that parsha Shema do not apply to her. Ain la law pesach of. She is not executed at the entrance of her father's house. Law Sela, if the witnesses who testified against her are found to be false, her husband does not pay the fine of 100 sellers. Haisa Harasa Lidasa Kedusha, if her conception and her birth were in Kedusha, meaning that she was conceived and born as a Jew. She's considered to have been born a Jewess in every respect, and all the standard laws apply to her. Yesh la'av ve'ein la pesach be'sa'av. If she has a father but does not have an entrance to the father's house, meaning that he's alive but he doesn't own a house. Yesh la pesach be'sa'av ve'ein la'av. Or she has an entrance to the father's house, but she doesn't have a father, meaning that her father was passed away, but he owned the house that now belongs to the heirs. Hare Zubiskila. She is put to death by stoning, even though the stoning cannot be performed at the entrance of her father's house. Lo namar pesach be'savia ella the mitzvah. Because the Torah requires the entrance of the father's house only as the mitzvah in its own right, and is not a necessary condition for the penalty of stoning. Mishnah Dalet. Av zaka b'bito b'kedusha b'kesef b'shtar of a bia. A father is entitled to the instrument of his daughter's betrothal, whether it is the money that the chassan gives for this purpose or a marriage document, and the father can choose a husband for her and let him betroth her by means of bia. That's one of the three ways that a kedushin is chal. He is entitled to what she finds, her work, and he has the right to cancel her vows. Mean that the father is entitled to any found object that she finds on the ground that doesn't have that is not required to be given to that. If you find an object that has no simanim, that does not need to return to the owner, then the father can keep that. Yeah, okay, fine. And he has the right to cancel her nidara. Mekabel is gita, but he receives her get, her document of divorce. However, if she inherited property, he is not entitled to eat its produce in her lifetime. Nises, when she is fully married, that's all. That's all when she has just heirs. Now, when she's fully married, yes, sir. Allah the husband has more rights than her father, and that he may eat the produce of her property in her lifetime. Besides the rights to keep her, besides the right to keep her fines and her work, as the counselor vows, a husband is also entitled to what her property produces. He is on the flip side, the husband is obligated to pay for her support, to pay her ransom if she's captured, and to pay for a burial if she dies before him. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda says, I feel honest Yisrael, well, Yifchos Mishnei Chalilim Mechanenes. Even a poor Jew may not have fewer than two flutes playing at his wife's funeral, and a woman who leads the mourners in lamenting. This is all done to inspire people to weep at a funeral by hiring flutes and a woman to lead the mournful chanting. Uh, yeah, okay. The the Tanakh disagrees with Yehuda. He says it's not necessary to hire two flutists and lamenting women. The Gemara explains that the Machlokas concerns a case where making such an elaborate funeral was the custom of the husband's family, but not the custom of the wife's family. The general rule is that a husband must give his wife all the advantages of his family's customs. The Tanakama holds that this rule does not apply after her death, whereas Rabbi Yehuda maintains that it applies even then as well. Okay. Leah Mishnah Hey. Leolam Hebrew Shus Ashadikanas Rishus Habal. She's always in the domain of her father until she enters the domain of her husband to complete her marriage. Masar Ha'al Shluchi Habal Harehi Hebrew Shus Habal. As soon as the father delivers her to the messengers of the husband, when the husband is sent to escort her to his home, she is in the domain of the husband. Halach av im shluchei habal or sha'alchu shluchei av im shluchei baal. However, if the father went together with the messengers of the husband, or even if just the messenger, if just messengers of the father went together with the messengers of the husband, harei he av. She remains in the domain of the father. Master shluchei av shluchei habal. However, if the messengers of the father were told by the father to escort the bride to the husband himself, but on the way, they met the husband's messengers and they gave her over to the husband's messengers. Hare Hebrew Habal, that she is in the domain of the husband. And all's good to go. Mishnah Vav. Ha'av hinu chai b'mizonas bito. The father is not obligated to support his daughter during his lifetime. Although a father may support his daughters, that obligation applies only after he dies and not when he is still alive. Mishnah is dealing here with children who are at least 6 years old. Children under that age are entitled, both sons and daughters are entitled to the father's support. If he doesn't support them, the court takes his money, even if he's poor, and uses it for that purpose. Regarding children over the age of 6, father is not obligated to support his sons or daughters. Nevertheless, he has a moral duty to do so. If he does not fulfill this duty, the court disgraces him in public until he complies, but they are not authorized to take his property. If he is wealthy enough to support his children, without difficulty, the court can even seize his property. Interesting. Zeh midrash darash Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah with the Chachamim b'Kerem B'Yavneh. Elazar ben Azariah derived this teaching from the text of the Kesubos before the Chachamim and the academy at Yavneh. Habanim Yershu Habanos Yizunu. The sons of the wife inherit their mother's Kesubah payment, and the daughters of the wife are supported. Since these two obligations are mentioned together, they are presumably similar. Mahabanim Enon Yorshin Elul Achim. This is the sons do not inherit the mother's Kesubah payment until after the father's death. So too, the daughters do not receive support until after the father's death. Lelkas of Lux, Mishnah Zayin. Lelkas of Luxuba, even if one did not write a Ksuba document for his wife, Basula Gova, my son. A Basula, a virgin, collects 200 zuz, mana, and a widow or other non-virgin collects a mana, 100 zuz. Based on this payment is a requirement decreed by Din, and is thus as therefore chayiv even if it was not recorded in the document. If you wrote that a certain field worth only one mana may be collected for her ksula payment in place of the 200 zuz, to which a basula is entitled. Lokas of Lako nechasim the east achrayin the ksubasich. They did not write for her all the properties that I own are pledged to you for your ksuba. Chayev, he is still obligated to pay the full amount with any property that he owns. Who Tanai based it, as it is a requirement decreed by based in that all of a man's properties are pledged to his wife's ksuba. Mishnah Ches. Lo kasavla im tish ba'i afrukinich rosvinich lila into. If one did not write for her in a ksuba document that, quote unquote, that if you are captured, I will ransom you and take you back as my wife, and the quote, Uvekohenes ahadrinach lemedinatich, or in the case of a woman who's married to a Kohen who cannot go back to her husband if she is captured, I will ransom you and I will return you to your city. Chayav, he's still obligated to do each of these things. Shehu Tanai Based in, because this is a requirement decreed by Based in, and as such applies even if it is not written in a document. Mishnah test. Nishpe is chayav of those. If she is captured, she is obligated to ransom her. Vim Amar Harekita Uksubasa Tifta is Asma. And if he said, here are her get and her ksuba, I'm divorced and currently paying her ksuba now, let her ransom herself with the money. Eino Rashai, he is not allowed. He is unable to exempt himself in this way from having to ransom her because the chiyuv remains in effect even after he divorces her. Laksa Chayil if she fell ill, he is obligated to heal her, to pay for medical care. Amar Hare Gita Uksubasa Tarfe as Asma. However, if he said here are her get and her ksuba, let her heal herself with the money. Rashai, he is allowed. He is able to exempt himself in this manner because once he divorces her, he is not hired to pay for any subsequent medical care. Mr. Yud, low cost of law. If even he did not write the following clause for his wife in her ksuba document, Binyan dichrin di yahavele leichi menai in yartun kesef kusubasich. When I die, the male children that you have from me will inherit the money of your ksuba. Yasser al chalkeho the im achihu. In addition to their portion of the estate that they share equally with their stepbrothers from another wife. Chayiv. He is nevertheless obligated to fulfill this clause, Shut based in, because it is a super requirement decreed by based in. The decree applies in the following situation. A man had two or more wives, each of whom had bore him sons. The wives died in his lifetime, and he inherited all the property that was recorded in each wife's ksuba. The Chachamim decree that when he dies, the property of each wife's ksuba is inherited only by her own sons and not by the sons of the other wife. Although the rest of his estate is shared by all his sons equally, the ksuba of each wife goes to her sons alone. Harishna teaches that even if the stipulation is not recorded in the wife's ksuba document, it is binding. Mishnah Yud Aleph, regarding another clause of the ksuba. Bana bina nuk bandi having like unite. Even if one did not write, female children that you will have for me, you have in Yasu Bebesi o Mitaznan Nechsai Ad Yisnav Nasva. The government shall live in my house and be supported from my estate after my death until they become betrothed to husbands. Chayev, he is obligated to fulfill this clause. Shehud Tanai based in, as it is a ksuba requirement decreed by based in. Mishnah Yud Beis, the last one for today, I think. Yeah. At Tehe Yasva Bebeisi Umitizna Min Chasai. Regarding another clause of the ksuba, even if one did not write, after I die, you shall live in my house and be supported from my property. Call you may, me God, Amunasich, Vivesi. All the days of duration of your widowhood in my house, Chayev, one is obligated to fulfill this clause, Shutanai based in, because it is a ksuba requirement decreed by based in. So, Kachayu on Yerushalayim Kosvin. The text quoted above is what the men of Yerushalayim would write in their ksubas. Anshi Galil Hayikosin Anshi Yerushalayim. And the men of Galilee would write their ksubas as the men of Yerushalayim did. Anshi Yehuda Hayikosin. However, the men of Judea would write Ad Shiyirtsu Hayorshin Litein Lich Ksubasich. You shall live in my house until my heirs wish to give you your ksuba payment. Therefore, in Judea, if the husband's heirs wish, they may give the widow her ksuba payment against her will, and thus release themselves from the obligation to her. In Yerushalayim and the Galil, however, where this provision was not added to the ksuba, the heirs cannot force the widow to accept the ksuba. Instead, they had to keep supporting her for the duration of her widowhood. Have a wonderful Yontif. We will continue with Perek on Erev Shabbos. Kol Tov. Get the Mayid.